Now that I've been participating in social media for a couple years, sometimes I'll see people make lists of their top 10 such and such games. Top 10 lists for a particular console seem to be the most common, but the one category that made me think about my own answers the most was games you would take with you to a deserted island. It's an interesting topic, because not only do they have to be games you love, but ones you could play over and over again without getting tired of. Today, I'm going to introduce the 10 games I would choose if I could never play anything else again. This isn't a ranking, it's just a list, so the order isn't necessarily important. Let's do this! Number 1 is Money Idol Exchanger for the PS1. I'm sure you've all seen my review of Money Idol Exchanger, but in the unthinkable case that you haven't, it's an arcade port of a versus puzzle game similar to Puyo Puyo or Magical Drop. There are coins at the top of the screen, and all you do is pick up coins from one spot and place them in another spot. Placing coins of the same value together will cause them to transform into the next higher value coin. For example, 5 10 yen coins together will become a 50 yen coin. And making chains of disappearing coins will cause your opponent's coins to drop faster. It's the simplest, most intuitive idea, and yet the depth of possible strategies, as well as the satisfaction of grasping the chaining system and pummeling your opponent, is top of the line. It doesn't hurt that the characters are all hyper cutesy Sailor Moon ripoffs who animate and come to life when you play. Money Idol Exchanger is one that could easily provide years of entertainment. Number 2 is Radiant Silvergun on the Sega Saturn. This was the first import game I ever bought way back when it was new in 1998, after seeing someone running it on a Japanese Saturn at my local Funko-Land. This was Treasure's first true shooter, and boy did they nail it. Not only did they nail it, but no other shooter has come close to delivering as many unique boss encounters and gameplay tricks since. Radiant Silvergun immediately gives you 6 weapons you can use freely. In the arcade you had to press certain buttons simultaneously to use several of them, but thankfully the Saturn controller has 6 buttons, so switching between weapons is much more straightforward on the console. The game is very much based around using the correct weapon for the correct situation, but you also gain experience and power up your weapons as you use them, so you're encouraged not to rely on any particular weapon too much. The creativity of the boss fights is out of this universe. It's truly an exposition of the brilliant minds that made up Treasure, and learning them all will take years, if not decades. Number 3 is Super Street Fighter 2 on the SNES. Yes, you heard correctly, not the 3DO version, the good old watered down SNES port. I know, it doesn't have the super meter, and I don't care. It's the version I grew up with. It's funny to think I never owned this game as a kid, but I rented the damn thing so many times I know it better than a lot of the games I did own. Having 16 characters in a console fighting game with so many different playstyles and such good balance was a miracle in the era it was released. A lot of kids I knew stuck with Ken and Ryu, but learning all the weird movesets of the 4 new characters broadened my understanding of what fighting games were capable of. It's truly the ultimate game for learning the basics of the genre, and learning to beat the game on the hardest difficulty with the less popular characters would provide countless hours of play. Number 4 is Mega Man 3 on the NES. Mega Man is a widely loved franchise for a good reason. It introduced many of the gimmicks that defined platform games for decades to come. Mega Man 3 is hands down my favorite in the series. It introduced the slide, had more balanced weapons, and the boss fights were more about reflexes than just spamming the correct weapon. All these things are important, but for me, the biggest appeal of the Blue Bomber's third outing is that the artwork, music, and gameplay come together in a way that convinces me I'm on a journey into another universe. This is the real reason I love video games so much, and Mega Man 3 hits it on the head. Yes, some of it is probably nostalgia, but so what? The music alone would keep me from ever tiring of it. Number 5 is the Sega Genesis version of Valis 3. Now, people who have played Valis 3 are probably thinking, are you serious? And I've acknowledged many times that the Valis games aren't necessarily shining examples of action platforming. The jump arc is quite stiff, and there aren't many thoughtfully placed jumps or platforming gimmicks. But what Valis does have is inspiration. The anime cutscenes give a sense of urgency, plus the artwork and music have an otherworldliness to them that make for a comprehensive experience. Even if Valis 3 isn't a super precise platformer, it inspires me in a way that goes beyond a video game. It makes me feel like life is worth living. So even if there are technically better action games, I never get tired of it. Number 6. Zenok Cross Zenok on the PS1. At least, I think that's how it's supposed to be read. I've never seen the pronunciation spelled out anywhere. This disc contains several variants of the original Zenok, which is a great game of course, but the real seller is Zenok Neo, which they call an updated version, but in reality is pretty much a new sequel and also compiles Final Shooter before they disbanded. Zenok Neo offers 3 ships to choose from, all of which can pick up 8 different weapons in-game, and nearly all of them are completely different for each ship. You also have a sort of super shot that can be used every 10 or 15 seconds, and it will make chains with other nearby enemies once it connects. Compile's algorithm that adjusts the difficulty depending on how well you're playing really shines here. With so many different playstyles, wild bosses, and an awesome soundtrack by Ko Hayashi and Daisuke Nagata, Zenok Neo has kept me coming back again and again over the years. Number 7 is Final Fantasy IV. I'm starting to worry there are way too many widely known games on this list, but hey, just because I review obscure games doesn't mean I can't like popular ones too. I first got Final Fantasy IV when I was 10 or 11, back when it was called Final Fantasy II in the US, and most of us had no idea that we weren't getting the whole picture. I had been a fan of RPGs and already played through the first Final Fantasy, as well as Dragon Warrior 1 and 2 on the NES, but Final Fantasy IV added so much to the genre and absorbed me in a way that no other game had. It added a real-time element to turn-based battles, a much more substantial story, a party that changed as the game progressed, so many different awesome special attacks, and those summon monsters. In fact, the character and enemy artwork alone is enough to soothe my nerves. It's one of very few games that I can just sit and look at and feel joy. The fact that it has my favorite soundtrack of any Final Fantasy game helps too. I know there's a sort of dispute about which is better, Final Fantasy IV or 6, and I also love 6, I really do, but it peters out in the second half, whereas Final Fantasy IV crescendos all the way to the end. Number 8 is Soul Blazer, yet another SNES game. Trust me, even I'm shocked. Soul Blazer was developed by Quintet, who had recently made a name for themselves in the game industry with the success of ActRaiser. It was an action RPG with a highly unique premise for the time, and may still be unique now. You play an angel sent from heaven to restore the living souls of Earth, who have been captured by the demon Death Toll. This involved clearing enemy nests in dungeons, which would then restore humans, animals, and architecture to the town in that area. While you are technically just killing all the enemies that pop out of a magical portal until they're gone, the concept of rebuilding the game world was and still is extremely satisfying. Just as satisfying was the mystical, melancholy worldview Quintet built into their games. You could enter people's dreams, talk with animals, and directly received orders from God himself. Yes, it's extremely easy by today's standards, and it turns out the original Japanese version is even easier than the North American one. But to me, it will never get old. Number 9 is Street Fighter Alpha 3. I play it on the Dreamcast, but if you have the Saturn version or even the original PCB, that's great too. When I played the Street Fighter Alpha games in the arcade, I would always stick with Ken or Guy. But once I owned the console version of Street Fighter Alpha 3, it gave me the room to start experimenting with other new characters and their unique fighting styles. If playing with traditional characters like Ryu or Chun-Li could be compared to rapping with your lyrics in front of you, then playing with Rolento, Rose, or Karen is like freestyling. And once I started to comprehend their individual momentums, I could run circles around my friends who were stuck in the Street Fighter II mentality. I had a hard time picking between this and Capcom vs SNK 2. Probably because I still don't really comprehend a lot of the SNK characters' playstyles, I went with Alpha 3. You will never, ever guess the 10th game on this list. Go ahead, pick a game. It isn't a Valis game, it isn't even Alien Soldier. Number 10 is the SNES version of Mr. Nuts. No, it's not a joke, and no, I'm not crazy. Well, I might be, but for other reasons. At first glance, Mr. Nuts appears to be yet another one of the countless anthropomorphic wannabe mascot animal platformers that flooded the 16-bit consoles. You control a happy-looking squirrel who can stomp on enemies from above, smack them with his tail, or throw acorns at them. If you only played Mr. Nuts for 10 or 15 minutes and just saw the first couple sub-levels, you would be forgiven for thinking that this is just another forgettable European-developed platformer riding on the success of Sonic the Hedgehog. But if you play for a bit longer, you start to realize just how big the stages are and how precise the platform and enemy placement is. And that nearly every song is 5 minutes per loop. And that the control and jump momentum are so perfectly reliable. And the difficulty curve is absolute perfection, each stage being just a bit harder than the one before. And there are countless secret areas if you want to complete the stages with 100% of the coins. Mr. Nuts is truly the most overlooked game of the 16-bit era, because it requires at least several hours, and realistically, more like several months before you can grasp just how well made every single aspect is. And even though Mr. Nuts hits every checkbox for quality game development, it has one thing even more important than all of those. It's magical. It's instantly nostalgic. The artwork and music remind you that you're not just on a journey to the end of the game, you're on a journey into your own heart. And that is why I play video games. So, there you go. In a way, I was surprised with a lot of the games I chose, or at least how not obscure this list ended up. Of course, I would also love to hear what games my viewers would choose for their own personal deserted island, so please tell me about them in the comments. And please don't choose Call of Duty. Okay, thanks, bye.